So some questions about light waves here. Thanks for those. Let's talk about number one first. It says, how does light travel in a straight line if it is in waves? So does that just mean it doesn't curve and take random turns while it's maintaining its wave? No. Well, really what I mean is if we imagine a photon as sort of the smallest piece of light, that photon does in fact travel in a straight line. So that photon, well, that's not a very straight line that I'm drawing right now, but if you imagined that I drew a straight line traveling along, our photon would in fact be traveling along that line. What oscillates is its electromagnetic field. So as the photon is traveling along this line, its electromagnetic field is oscillating. And it oscillates at a certain rate, and that is proportional to what we call its frequency and or wavelength. And so what happens is, as the photon is traveling at the speed of light, its electromagnetic field is changing. So it has a strong electric field, then a weak, then a strong, then a weak, then a strong, and then a weak, and that oscillates as it travels along that straight line. And that field can interact with matter, specifically electrons, and that is the basics of how spectroscopy works in the sense that we're discussing it in class. So the oscillating electric field of our photon as it travels in a straight line interacts, or at least can interact, with electrons in chemical systems. So the photon does in fact travel straight, but it's just the electromagnetic field that it has that oscillates. Question 2 says, when an atom is jumping from level to level, basically, how do you go down a level? So let's imagine again we've got, like we deal with in class, we've got some set of energy states, something like that, and let's just say we've got principal quantum number of 1, 2, 3, and 4, so on and so forth. Suppose we are dealing with an electron that happens to be in a 2 state, principal quantum number of 2, and we're wondering about how can the system that is described by this diagram, so this schematic diagram, how can that system transition to one that is defined by that electron being somewhere lower than whatever it is. So let's just talk about going from 2 down to 1. How that happens is really, for our purposes, spontaneous. So an electron in a principal quantum number of 2 state can spontaneously come down to any state below it, in this case just the first one because that's the only one available, but it will spontaneously fall down to that energy level. And in doing so, it must emit energy of exactly the difference between those 2 states. So usually that means it will emit a photon. So an electron that exists in state number 2, as it spontaneously relaxes down to a lower energy state, and it could be any one, but in this case I've chosen 1, as it relaxes, the energy difference between its excited state and its ground state has to be lost, and it's lost usually in our discussions in the form of a photon. And that photon will exactly have the energy that is associated with the difference between these 2 energy states. So nothing has to happen to a chemical system for its electrons to fall down in energy. That will happen spontaneously. And for our purposes, it will be unpredictable in the sense that an electron can somewhat cascade. So if you had an electron in a principal quantum number of 4 state, it can transition to any of 3, 2, or 1, or do each successively, one after another. We're not concerned with predicting that exact behavior, but the actual decline in energy does happen spontaneously. In order to go up in energy, of course, we do have to do something to that system. So we need to provide energy to the system in order for its electrons to increase and go to a higher energy state. But to come back down, we don't do anything. That spontaneously happens. So basically, to really get at the point of your question there, in terms of what happens when they don't have enough energy to go down a level, that's actually not a thing. So you don't need energy to go down a level. You just naturally want to become more stable. So what you do is you take the energy you do have and you just release it to go down a level, and you release exactly that amount of energy.